from the analysis you've given us, but let's pick up on some of the data and explore it in a bit more depth as we move on to our opening big debate. We're looking at rising again, how we rebuild a stronger America's aviation market after COVID, and reflecting on some of Peter's figures that he's giving us there. I'm delighted Peter joins us. I'm delighted to introduce our other panelists, who are Jose Ricardo Botello, who is Executive Director and CEO at ALTA, the Airline Association. Hello, Jose. Welcome.
Hi, how are you? Hi, Max.
Good.
Hi, Peter. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Good morning, everyone.
We are also joined by, we've got Roger Lario, who is Senior Vice President at Sales and Marketing at Swissport. Welcome to you, Roger. How are you doing?
Good morning, Max. Good morning.
Good stuff. Morning. I'm hoping that we've also got Raphael on the line, but I can't see him on my screen. I think we haven't got him right now. Hopefully we'll be joined shortly by Raphael, but let's get it underway and talk about some of the issues just raised.
He is connecting right now. I see here.
Here we go, right on time. Just while Raphael's connecting there, I'll begin perhaps, we'll begin with you, Jose, just a reflection on your thoughts as an association on the market right now, and where you believe we are at, and what the rest of 2021 is looking like for your members.
Yeah, I don't know if I have something to add anymore. Peter, you covered very well our region, actually. But what we see right now is that we have a tough moment for our industry. When you talk about Latin America and Caribbean, we're talking about the business environment is not very good. The aid from the government, we hope we could have some aid for the industry, but we haven't. And I mean, with the financial support, actually what we had was some change in rules, like labor rules or even deferment. But actually, when you talk about the support for financial support and loans, we didn't get this. So the situation in our region is complicated. But the way that we see with the numbers that we had is that we see the light in the end of all that, especially for the next summer and in the next years, especially because if the road in the past was, okay, we have to work together, and we have done a tremendous work, AIERA, ALTA, the local bars, ACI, the governments, ICAO, all together. The main word was, let's give confidence to bring the people back to fly. But I would say that right now, the main word should be vaccine. We have to talk. We have to still keep working on that. Talk with the governments. This is the right time for. Okay, now.
Raphael's up. There we go. We'll just mute, and hopefully that's better.
So I would say that the vaccination of the population is the main goal right now. It's the best way to bring the people back, and also to be again in this connection world that we all need in Latin America and Caribbean. So this is the way that we see for our members.
Thank you, Jose. I'll come to you, Roger. Give us a perspective, Swissport, the world's largest ground handler. What is it like, the operating conditions right now, and what do you feel that the environment will be come the end of this year?
Yeah, no, I think for all of us, whether it's an airline or service provider, these are conditions and times that we've just have not ever experienced, and this is a lot of this is baptism by fire and learning as we go. So whether it's an airline or whether it's an organization or whether it's Swissport or any of the service providers, this is really where it's a matter of adapting to our environment, adapting to what the carriers, our business partners need, and they're going through the same thing. Now, in some cases, in some parts of the Americas region, which is what we're talking about here, as Peter mentioned absolutely correctly, there are some parts that are doing much better than others. So if you look at the ground handling sector in the US, drastically different than the ground handling sector in LATAM. And if you look at the cargo line of business, I think globally, cargo has done very well and has probably been the one that's been the most opportunistic when it comes to taking a bad situation and turning it into good for global commerce and consumption. So without the cargo supply chain, we would not be where we are today. So that's good. So I guess for us at the end of the day, it's really about adapting and listening to our business partners and trying to find a way and wait until the vaccine gets to the point. And again, depending on where you are, gets to the point to where there is light at the end of the tunnel. I think there is. Peter's numbers are exactly the same thing that we're looking at from a market standpoint, whether it's US or whether it's Canada or LATAM. But yeah, we're not going to, 2021 is going to be, still ramping up a little bit, but nothing like it was pre-2019. So for us, it's just, continuing to support and provide stability where we can to our business partners.
Thank you, Roger, and we'll pick up on some of those points in a minute. And we are now joined, hello, Rafael Echevane, who is going to give us an airport perspective. Hopefully we can get you on audio. Rafael joins, he's the Director General at ACI Latin America. Rafael, you can hear me loud and clear. We'd be very interested to get your summary on the mood amongst your members and airports in the region.
Well, I think that basically what has been said is very much along the lines of what the airports are thinking. Basically, we want to recover as fast as possible. The only way to do that is by relaxing the restrictions that the countries have imposed. I mean, it is somehow concerning that some countries start now imposing more restrictions when actually we should be actually removing them. But of course, this is, as we know, not something driven by science, but more by politics and perhaps the unknowns that politicians are facing. The situation was getting much better until December last year. Unfortunately, in Latin America, we see a decline in traffic numbers now, and that is as a result of the restrictions imposed by the US, which we are not against. I mean, I think that the important thing here is to have clear guidelines, okay? If everyone is going to fly with a PCR, well, let's make it clear, and then let's open up the borders for those who actually have tested negative. And now, of course, with vaccinations rolling up, then, whoever has that vaccination, to make it clear. And for that, we think that the travel passports is going to be playing a very important role. And so as far as the airports go, the airports actually have been very responsive to the recommendations established by ICAO and, of course, the recommendations by CDC and European CDC. We actually rolled out, as you probably know, one thing called airport handling, health accreditation. And, our region, Latin America, was the first one to jump in. We actually had more airports, under that scheme than any other airport, which basically demonstrates that you are complying with the ICAO recommendations. So airports have responded. Airlines, of course, have responded too. We don't have any recorded cases, at least that we are aware of any contagion happening at airports or airlines. So, as I say, politics is driving this. We encourage countries to really open up, as long as flying is safe, by ensuring that people have either PCRs or vaccination. Yeah.
Thanks, Rafael. Excellent point. And let's lead off from it, and I'll come back to you, Peter. What measures would you like to see around that drive for uniformity and standardization between countries? How do you see that being delivered most effectively? Because if we can do it right, you're going to achieve a more sustained and powerful return to volumes, perhaps even than your figures gave us. If we can get that uniformity between countries to fly, then it would stand to reason that the recovery is quicker and is more powerful than having disparate border controls between different nations.
No, and I think as an industry, we demonstrated it last year, back in around June, when ICAO came up with a series of biosafety measures that we had to apply on a global basis. And this was, again, regardless if you're an airline, airport, or supplier, there were the measures that were put in place, global standards, which the industry implemented very quickly. And as a result, we've been able to safeguard, again, that the industry does not become a vector of the virus. Where it has gone wrong, and Rafael talks a little bit to it, it's the politics. It's the lack of standardization of government in how they go about putting measures in place. We've seen that we went from a lockdown to opening, back to a lockdown, and in between we have a combination of a series of different types of restrictions. You go to Canada, which has been a very proactive market in terms of a healthy culture of travel and tourism, strong aviation market, and a very strong government in terms of supporting aviation. It's been totally different. Canada has been one of the stringent countries in the world in terms of mandating restrictions and quarantine measures, which in the end are not based on scientific evidence. At times we're seeing many other governments act more on the politics than on the science. Now, I think none of us on this panel representing our mutual organization will disagree on the actions that governments need to do to safeguard its citizens' health and combat the virus. We're the first that are going to do that. However, with the testing that we have available today, in terms of either antigen or PCR, it's demonstrated it works. With the number of vaccines that that are coming into play, it works. What we need our governments to do is we need to have standardization, we need to implement, and not regress, but we need to move forward based on the science. So we need to better utilize testing. We need to start coming up with rolling out, how are we going to implement the vaccinations? How are travel passports going to be implemented? There has not been enough discussion on that, and we need to have that discussion. The one thing I will say is not the industry, governments have been too reactive in implementing these measures, and we need to do a more effective job to restart. Because in the end, Max, it's about one, ensuring passenger safety and building passenger confidence. Unless we're able to implement global standardization, you're not going to have confidence of the traveler to come back, because the measures are going to be very different in different parts of the world. And we're already seeing the U.S. Biden administration has already started talking about the travel passport. In Europe, they're already implementing different measures, but we're not seeing governments talking to each other. So, and these are the two most important air transport markets in the world. Can you imagine the rest of the world that's very dependent on these two regions that have not even come into the mix? That's what we need to improve on the standardization of the procedures, making sure that regardless in what region, what country, we're all applying the same standards.
Thank you, Peter. A comment from Jose Roger on this issue of what you believe governments should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, since the beginning, this is very, Peter has a great point here, because what happened was, since the beginning of that, the whole industry have worked with the government, actually, because we did a tremendous work with the ICAO. And when you're talking about the ICAO and you're talking about the carts, we're talking about the government, because the government is there. So the industry have done everything that was possible with the government altogether. But what we see after that is that you have a document, you have a very important document that could be done, it could be useful for the whole, for the entire world. But what we saw was that many countries, they decided alone to do something just for them. And this is terrible, because how can we bring, as an industry, with so many surveys, with so many industry studies, with so many data, to show that for the travelers that, okay, we are safe. If you go to the airport, we have protocols. If you go to the aircraft, we have protocols. If you fly to the other place, we have protocols. But how can you convince that if each country has been doing something different? Like, who is going to travel abroad with the doubt if this person can come back to your own country? This is very, very difficult for us as an industry. So that's why since the first beginning, we have been trying to show that, okay, we have the recommendation that was not something from the industry. This is not something just from the industry. This is something that we built together with governments. And now, even more, we have the new 6 recommendations that are very, very good and useful for the government, but still, we still have seen some quarantines, some lockdowns, and this is terrible for the whole sector, especially for one sector that has been showing all the time that we are not vectors, It's safe to travel. So keep the skies open. This is the message that we have been trying to bring for the government.
Max,
for you. Sorry, I'll come back. I'm just going to get Roger's view, and I'll come back to you, Peter. I promise.
I think what Jose and what Peter has said is true, and I think if you look at, again, the various governments, they definitely are not talking to each other, and they're looking at themselves as a whole. Because if you look at the airlines are doing, and from what I've seen from the business partners we've talked to, they're doing everything they can to try to instill confidence in the traveling public, whether it's blocking middle row seats, whether it's educating people on the air circulation system on the airplanes, whether it's at the airports, with the social distancing. The service providers are doing everything they can within reason by continuing to provide the service with their QHSE groups, to make sure that staff is safe. So at the end of the day, the governments really have to start talking to each other, and in some cases, the U.S. government should be one of those also, to where they need to open up the borders and say, listen, the borders are open, because here it is that the U.S. government is just shelling out tons of money, and I get it, to the U.S. carriers to stimulate and to keep them flying and to make sure that they're operating. They're doing a great job within the U.S., but it's up north to Canada, it's down south, and I think this is where we need to start opening up, because this is exactly what you're giving the money, the subsidies to these carriers, granted some loans and some grants, but to make sure that the airline continues to operate. Well, you want people to come to the airport and sit, but you've got to open up the borders, and the governments need to start talking to each other to say, okay, here's how we're going to do this with all the various software and the things that Peter and Jose already mentioned that are out there to instill confidence. It's there. We just have to make sure that it just keeps getting pounded, and the public starts picking up confidence with us.
Thank you, Roger. Peter, you want to make a point, and then I've got.
I was going to illustrate just an example of how lack of standardization there is out there. In Europe, most countries in the European community have issued no travel or travel bans for their citizens to travel within their countries. So if you're in Spain, you can't fly from Madrid to Mallorca during the Easter break, but a German is permitted to fly from Munich to Mallorca, or from Paris to London, but they can't travel from Paris to Nice. That is what shows how disjointed the system is. Again, we understand the responsibility governments have to reduce the risk, but these type of measures where you can't fly domestically, but you can fly internationally within the EU just makes no sense. And that's what brings confusion, and that brings also creates lack of confidence. The same thing as Roger was talking about the US in terms of all the measures we have implemented, but we still have restrictions with the EU or China or Brazil. We need to start looking at how we begin to lift these restrictions and ensure that we continue to use the measures that have been very successful during the last year.
Thanks, Peter. I've got a question for you, and just a reminder to all of those watching around the Americas, around the world. If you want to drop your questions in for the panel, then just drop them into that Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen, and I will get to them. And please ask away on this issue of rebuilding passenger confidence, of what we'd like to see from governments to help drive the recovery. Anything that we come across that you want to mention, please drop it in there. Question from Ingrid for you, Peter. Are you able to comment on, hello Ingrid, by the way, from ATS, thanks for the question. Are you able to comment on any supply chain issues or bottlenecks you may see with the presumed restarts of operations in the airports? And I'm sure Rafael may want to comment on that one as well.
I think we're going to have a few challenges all across the number one priority that we're asking governments at this point, particularly with vaccinations, is to make aviation professionals. And when we talk about aviation professionals, we're talking about pilots, flight attendants, ground staff, cargo agents, anyone that has to deal with the entire value chain, airport personnel, to be considered as essential workers. And we're saying it not only from an air transport standpoint to restart, but on the importance to be able to move the vaccines. As I mentioned in my presentation, the vaccines, the number one mode of transportation to move this valuable cargo is going to be through air travel. And we need to make sure that our personnel, regardless of how you sit in the value chain, is going to be vaccinated so we can continue to push the vaccines all across the world. So that's probably the number one ask that we're asking our government. Make sure that that air travel personnel, people working in air transport are considered as essential workers so they can get vaccinated, and we can ensure that the value chain is going to be front and center to move the vaccinations, the vaccines, but also most importantly, to help with the restart of air transport.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. Raphael, could you have a comment there on bottlenecks with the restart of airports?
Well, I mean, adding up to what Peter has said, and I totally agree with what he has said. Basically, the only concern right now is as the travel passports start rolling out, is to ensure that there is this commonality that, we actually, the airports know what to do exactly, what the governments are going to do, ensure that, when someone shows up from, say, I don't know, China, you actually can scan that code, to prove that that person was vaccinated, and so on and so forth, to ensure that there's this commonality, that the systems, the different systems, as you know, IATA has the travel pass, there's a common pass, there are many different initiatives, that there is this commonality, so that when the passengers show up at the airport, there is no chaos, and there is orderly flows and what have you. I mean, were discussing with Peter a few days ago. I mean, technology is our biggest ally in this crisis. Let's make use of technology, but of course, let's ensure that it is a common system that we can all. I mean, it's basically very much along the lines of what we do with credit cards. I mean, you can use with the same machine an American Express or a Visa or a MasterCard. Basically, it comes down to that commonality, and here we encourage governments to really get down to business, and the industry to actually discuss this and get on.
Yeah. Thanks, Raphael. Jose, did you want to make a point? Yeah, I thought you did.
Yeah, I'd like to add something that is very important. The industry, as an industry, we have been saying all the time, look, we should put our people as a priority for vaccination, but this is very important, and also to keep in mind again that this is a recommendation of the ICAO as well. I mean, even the representative of the government at the International Civil Aviation Organization, they're saying, look, let's look for these employees, let's look for these partners, these stakeholders to get the vaccine right now. Because especially when you're talking about the Latin American, Caribbean, the only way to deliver the only way to deliver the vaccine is through the airline. So we have to keep this in mind and start this process to put our people in the whole region, and I'm saying here, the Latin and Caribbean, that is very important to put our people as a priority for the vaccination.
Thanks, Jose. One bottleneck that I'm sure you will all have a comment on, I'm going to come to Roger first on this one, is the huge numbers of employees that have had to be furloughed, laid off. There have been millions and millions of job losses across the region, as I have everywhere else around the world within the aviation sector. When we see the recovery gathering speed and we need to reskill, there is obviously an enormous challenge there in bringing those people back and making sure that they have the requisite skill sets and they're returning to deliver safe operations from the very, very start. Roger, have you got a comment on how you're looking to manage that enormous challenge there at Swissport?
Actually, there's a couple of ways that we look at it because of the multiple business lines that we have. So if you look at the ground handling sector of it, where right now that's the most depressed, of the lines of business. So you have staff that are at home that through the CARES Act and through the restrictions and the requirements of the CARES Act, we have people that we've elected to stay at home because we don't want to bring them into an environment where they could contract the virus. So you've got folks that will be sitting at home and will come back in 2 months. And this is where, the fast track of the recurrent training, and again, depending on what you're working on, there are going to be certain aspects to where it's kind of like riding a bike. You'll never forget it. You check in passenger service agents, with the systems that they're on, it's real simple. The ramp, it's real simple, but it's just a matter of getting now the training to the carrier specific that needs to be updated, or to the carrier specific training that is required because of some changes. So in that case, that's something that we have to look at, and we look at on a case by case, business line by business line basis. Because then if you talk about cargo, cargo is for everybody, it's going very well. There is no retooling. It's actually quite the opposite. It's how do we get more people in the door? And this is kind of one of those things that I wanted to add to what Jose and Rafael and Peter were saying, with regards to the airports, for service providers, one of the things that we've been tasked and we found out is that, if there's an airport that is suffering somewhere where we have staff that is sitting and try to create synergies and try to use the staff that we have, we could very easily send staff from city A to city B. The problem is that at city B, or airport B in this case, you have restrictions that the airport won't allow that employee to come and work on the airfield as temporary staff. So there are ways and there are things that you can do as service providers, and I think all my colleagues out there in the service provider area probably have suffered it or have experienced this, is that there's a block there to where we can't send TDY staff because of airport restrictions, where they won't allow us to do that. But then again, on the cargo side, again, we're having a hard time trying to secure staff because there's so many people that are out on unemployment, and there it's quite the opposite of what we're experiencing on the ground handling side. So it just depends on what sector you're talking about, and there's good and bad in both.
And have you looked, I mean, we'll touch on this a bit more tomorrow at the cargo panel, but therefore, are you looking to transition many of the staff who are in the passenger operation side of the business to that cargo function?
Yeah, well, actually, for a temporary basis, yeah, because we have ramp staff because the majority of our business is international. So obviously, a lot of the international carriers are just not at capacity or near capacity. So we have staff that we could deploy to another market, to handle belly cargo that's coming in on passenger airplanes, or the cargo that's coming in from the various carriers that are taking advantage of this. But again, there's restrictions in the doing that, which to me just really doesn't make sense, because you have Peter who's badged in Atlanta, and if Peter's badged in Atlanta, the same criteria that Peter received for his badge in Atlanta is the same criteria that I was badged in Washington, D.C. As an example, right? So we should be able to move back and forth, again, helping and creating synergies where there needs to be help. And again, depending on the business line, right? Because we easily could send support staff to assist our cargo group with what they're doing, but again, there's restrictions here that we can't. And some airports actually have even shut down the temporary duty badge, from bringing staff in. So these are, again, going back to, government, where the bottleneck is, how they can help. From a service provider standpoint, that's what, and then also from an airline, from a business partner standpoint, it would be great to be able to tell our business partners, yeah, we can bring in resources, we can bring in staff that's sitting idle. So bring in whatever you need to bring in as far as extra flying, extra capacity, and we'll take care of it. We're just not there yet.
Thank you very much, Roger. Any other comments on this issue of reskilling and the responsiveness that Roger touches on there to bring staff in?
Max, I think one of the issues, if you talk to the airlines or even some of the grants handlers that are providing support to the airlines, actually the number of staff are almost at the levels, in some cases, of those of 2019, with only 30% of the operations taking place. And the reason that this is taking place, because now it's taking much longer, almost 3 or 4 times longer, to check in passengers, because they have to validate different certificates and make sure that those passengers that are traveling either domestically or international, where you have to show attestations, you have to show negative PCRs. And since, to Rafael's point, a lot of this is not digitized. We're not using apps yet. So everything has to be shown in paper form. So where in the past, a normal check-in process could take a minute, 2 minutes, it's now taking in some cases up to 12, 14 minutes per passenger. So while the industry is only, operating at 30, 40% of its capacity compared to 2019, in many cases, the airlines are fully staffed just to look at and manage and make sure that those passengers are fit to travel. Because the last thing you want to do is transport someone who is not fit to travel, gets to the destination, and then the airline is fine. This is why, to Rafael's point, we have, as an industry, a huge opportunity now to utilize the technology. The technology that we were planning as an industry to implement over the next 5 to 6 years, we're now ramping up much quicker to do it today. And it's not only on the validation of health certificates and vaccines, it's the entire experience of the passenger, how he prepares for his travel. From home, at the airport, going through immigrations, customs, and security. So that's what we, as an industry, we have the opportunity to really ramp up. So that passenger experience is going to be different moving forward.
And what are those enablers that you see then in detail? Those so is that an app-based check-in? We've seen more of that in Europe, contactless boarding. I mean, it'd be interesting to hear from all of you. And what are those digital solutions that we?
I think it's a combination. Rafael can touch a little bit more on it, but I think it's the entire how the passenger checks in today. It's very different from what it is was before. The passenger today not only gets his boarding card, but he'll be able to get his tag for his baggage. He'll get to the airport. It should be contactless tracing through security, immigrations. That's something we're beginning to see in many parts of the world. You should be able to go. The first person that you should be seeing as a passenger should actually be the flight attendant who is receiving you on board an airplane. That's what we're striving for towards the future, where you're able to make sure that the moment you leave home, you're ready to get on that airplane. You have all the paperwork, the certification. You can drop off your bag at a drop off, and you're going through a process where you're fit to travel. It's safe and secure. And the person who's going to say hello to you is that person on board the airplane.
Okay. Rafael, I can see you nodding along.
Yeah.
That concept.
No, totally. Because, the interesting thing here is that all this has already been invented and all this was already being rolled out, by different airlines, airports around the world. In our part of the world, in Latin America, for example, Uruguay and Aruba are way ahead. For example, as a non-Uruguayan, you can enter Uruguay without talking to anyone. And I'm talking like entering the country, with facial recognition. All these systems exist. Some countries have been hesitant to introduce them for whatever reasons, mainly driven by, labor issues and what have you. Now is the time, because not only the experience becomes better for the passenger, and that's what we airports and airlines want, the experience to be much better, to reduce the queues, to reduce the interaction, not because we don't like people, but because we know it can be faster, okay? And also, and that's the beauty of it, it's also safer from a health point of view, no touching, no interaction, no talking to in front of people. And as I say, all that exists. It's a question, once again, of government saying, let's roll it out. Let's make it happen, because it exists. It's there. As I say, Aruba, for example, the other day, they just started doing the trials with JetBlue. Fantastic, Uruguay, as I say, is ready to go. It's just the rest of the countries, doing it, and with Peter, and the other initiatives, rolling out the travel passports, and then we are off going. Many people ask, how will travel be in the future? And I keep on saying, I hope it will be even better than before. We want the experience to be even much enjoyable, so that people can relax and enjoy the flight and enjoy the experience at the airports or whatever, or at the destination.
No, it's a very pertinent point. And, you've mentioned, Peter, what you don't want as a passenger is a 15-minute, longer than that queue, but 15 minutes just to do your own check-in with various bits of paper. Incredibly frustrating, and it adds cost to all the stakeholders, the ground handler, the airline, the airport, to process through those queues so slowly. But the question that I've got for you then is, it does sound like a much more efficient journey through digitization, but how do we then drive investment in this opportunity at a point in our story where liquidity in the aviation market is so tough and so tight? So this is an enormous opportunity, but how do we fund it?
Well, I think, first of all, the industry has proven that there is investment interest there, not only from the airline standpoint, I think also from the airport standpoint. Considering the crisis that we're living today, if we compare it to 9/11, post 9/11, no one wanted to invest in the industry, regardless if you were an airport, an airline. No one. Today, you've seen we've had a lot of government support financially to get us through this crisis, but at the same time, many of the airlines, airports, suppliers have been able to obtain financial support through the public investment avenues, and this shows that Wall Street and the financial markets are interested in this industry. They know that this industry will get back on its feet, will get back to what it was pre-2019, and even get even better. From our standpoint, we are very optimistic. Like in anything, this is going to be a challenge over the next couple of years. The industry is going to come back smaller. It's going to be much more limited in some cases, less airplanes, less connectivity, less frequencies. But once we're able to move forward past 2024, our forecast is showing we're going to have a boom. Air travel is going to double in all parts of the world. And what we have to take advantage during this period of time, we cannot become complacent. We need to make sure that technology is invested. We continue to modernize our airplanes. We expand on the infrastructure part of the cargo, and we have the right capabilities for passengers to have a good, safe, and secure experience. What we don't want to do is go down the line that we suffered after 9/11, that we're still suffering today, that the security measures that were implemented as consumers, passengers, or airlines or airports or suppliers, we're still experiencing because governments fail to standardize procedures across the world. And if you go to Europe, you're going to go through a very different security experience than you do in the US or in other parts of the world. We cannot do that in biosafety, biosecurity, and how we move forward. And that's why the standardization, and a lot has been put on us as an industry. I think as an industry, we learn we have to implement these technology advancements, but we need government. We need government to really work on the immigration standpoint, the regulatory standpoint, the security standpoint.
Thank you, Peter. Jose, I don't know if you want.
If I could just very quickly,
then...
because I agree with Peter. The money is there. People are willing to invest because one thing that also technology brings is efficiency. The operations are much more efficient. So in some instances, they pay by themselves. Okay. And of course, as Peter was saying too, security. I mentioned safety before, health, sanitation and all that, health, safety. Security, we know, is enhanced with the technology available. So, it's a positive for absolutely everyone.
Thanks, Rafael. Jose.
And Max, there is something that is very important to say, is that this industry, especially this industry is extremely necessary for us as a human being. And when you consider, like in Latin America and Caribbean, when we don't have like trains like you have in Europe, we don't have like roads like you have in another place, the only way to connect the Latin American Caribbean is through aviation. So with this in mind, you see how necessary we are, and especially in this moment, because right now this is the point of no return. I mean, we have to move forward, and the technology is there, the moment is there. For this crisis, we have a huge opportunity to change the mindset of not just for the government, but as well our mindset. Because I'll tell you something, for the first time ever, I've seen the whole chain working together, seated in a table, trying to figure out a way to see the light in the end of this tunnel. So this is the moment, and the technology is there, the money is there. And I'll give you an example. Even with this crisis, we still see the huge programs in Latin America and Caribbean for the concession of the airports, like Rafael, right? For the airport, which means investments, which means new technology, and more than ever, the opportunity to sit again with the whole sector and try to find better way to travel and best and safer way to travel.
Thank you, Jose. I've got a couple of questions for our audience that I want to load up quickly before we carry on with the discussion. I have got a question on digitalization that I also want to ask you. So everyone logging in, if you can now vote on these questions, be interested to get your views, and we'll load up the results later. Have you seen any signs of recovery as operators so far in the year of 2021? So in the first, coming up for the end of the third month. And I believe we have a second question as well. So we vote on that one now. And we will load up our next one, hopefully. We can get the technology to work. We'll get that loaded up. There we go. Thanks, guys. Quick on the draw. So our second one, what's the single most important factor you believe in assisting our swift recovery from the pandemic? Is it government support packages, whether they've been in the form of loans, grants, to keep liquidity and to allow us to remain solvent? Is it the vaccine rollout, which Peter, you were very unequivocal there that you believe that is key? Coordinated travel protocols between all countries. Unfortunately, it's not multiple choice because I'm sure You'd pick them all, but which one of these do you believe is most influential in driving the recovery? Reduced taxation on ticket prices from various different national governments? Or is it this issue of passenger confidence, which I want to come back and ask the panel on in a little more detail in a minute, but do we need an industry-wide campaign to try and increase people's confidence to return through check-in gates onto aircraft and fly again? So please do vote on that one now. And whilst you do, we had a question come in when we were talking about digitization from Enrique. Hello, Enrique. He's asked, how do we deal with the different privacy rules in the process of gathering all that digital information on passengers? What's a sensible route?
Max, so I'll share what we're doing from the IATA travel pass standpoint. And I think that's the line we're going to be going down. The travel pass is an application like any other vehicle. What the travel pass does, it links the different testing and vaccination facilities that have been approved by the different countries to the application. Now, the information in terms of privacy sits on the passenger, on the holder of that app. That information is not managed by IATA or Verifly or others. So when the passenger does receive his vaccination or his negative PCR, positive PCR, and he receives that information, it's going to come to him. And then he is responsible to pushing that information onto the airline or to the government to comply with the mandate to travel. So from our standpoint, because of the privacy requirements that are in many countries of the world, the industry is not going to hold on to that information. The bearer of the information is the holder of that person who is responsible of the passenger that will be receiving his information and then pushing it on to the government or to the airline.
Okay, so there is a way to mitigate any risk.
Yeah, and that's the standard that we've been working, and we need to work as an industry. And this is the one area that we need to be very careful. That we've been very critical on governments in the past of lack of standardization. We need to make sure that as an industry, regardless what application you will use, Verifly, Travel Pass, Common Pass, it all speaks the same common language. As to Rafael's point, it's important that when you buy a product, you use your American Express, your Visa or MasterCard, you're putting into one machine. Mm-hmm. That's the same thing that we need our different applications to be. So governments read one system from many different, one standard from many different systems, because that's what can really push us back in terms of getting the aviation sector restarted. If different suppliers use different languages in terms of standards, and you didn't need different machineries. Imagine at an airport, if you had to have different types of equipment to read. So we need one standard to read that type of information.
We need VHS and not a Betamax for those of us.
That's exactly it. Exactly.
Okay. Jose, really interesting. Wanted to pick up on it. You made a point a moment ago about you've seen this terrific spirit of collaboration, and it's really helped drive some great partnerships and innovations in this time of crisis. Can you tell us a little bit more about those? And I'd also like to come to Roger with that question about how, and all of you really, but how we're seeing a reforming of the partnership model between airlines, handlers, airlines, and airports in response to this.
Yeah, thank you, Max. I believe that Roger said something about that, and I agreed 100% when he said something. Is that let's come back to the beginning of this pandemic time. Quickly, the industry called the ICAO, so we were all together in order to find a document and that document was the CARC document. But at the same point, we had to work with each country, each regions. And this is very, very important. I've never seen, I believe that maybe Peter, you have been more time in this business than mine, I've never seen a crisis like that. Maybe in the Second War or something like that, maybe. But what we saw since the first beginning was that we could go for webinars, we could get together in certain points, just with the whole chain to find a way to discuss the matters, the problems that we had in order to find a way out. And when I'm talking about the whole chain, I would like to include even the tourism sector, you know? So as aviation, airport, ground handling, everyone was there to say, okay, we have a huge problem. We don't see how can we handle this alone. We need the government. So let's stay together. Let's get it together in order to find a way out. And this is, if you could say something that something is beautiful about this whole process, I would say that this partnership that was made for the first time in my point of view with all together. And this is very important. I hope that we can keep this after this time of pandemic.
Thank you. So, Roger, can you give us some examples of where you have redefined partnerships with airlines? You know, maybe involve cargo. You've mentioned that on a couple of points earlier, but interested to hear how there has been this in spirit of collaboration and what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you know, we, as everybody has, you know, from the airlines, from the airports, service providers, you know, we as service providers, what we like to see is we like to be the solution, and this is something that we talk about within Swissport all the time. You know, it's let's be the solution, let's not be the problem. So if a carrier comes to us and says, hey, we are in this, you know, in this predicament where this is an area that we have not ventured into in the past, and now we're getting into that in order to keep airplanes flying, keep crews current, et cetera, et cetera. This is where we've got to come together, and this is where the communication, the lines of communication are drastically now much more open. There are things that we're talking about that we have not talked about in the past. There are processes and things that we have done, handling that we have not done in the past, and you can talk about those in a complete another segment between boxes and seats and et cetera. So it's just a matter of, you know, we have business partners. So we are there as a service company. And again, I speak from Swissport as a service provider, and probably all the service providers. We're there to help solve problems. Mm-hmm. And in order for us to solve the problem that we're in, we will get out of it. And in order for normalcy to come back, we just have to continue to be positive, continue to look at how we can find answers to the solutions, and also some of the problems. And again, I mentioned some of the problems that we have, and we'll find, whether I should say the challenges, with shifting staff or shifting resources or shifting assets, you know, or moving equipment, you know, that's idle to where it can be used somewhere else. But from a partnership standpoint, I think that is the key to where, as a service provider, we have to be part of the solution. And again, this is something that the team talks about constantly, and the company looks at and talks about constantly with our business partners. And I think our business partners look for service providers to come up with solutions for them that they may not have encountered or don't have the sources to put together for.
And what do you see the lasting effect of that being on things like SLAs between airlines and handlers? Do you see there being a legacy that we will see a shift in the way those partnerships are structured and the measures are slightly altered?
Yeah, I think when you talk about, SLA and again, depending on where you want to talk about, but I think SLAs in general will still be there, you know, because that's, you know, and having been on the airline side, I understand, you know, why carriers and business partners want SLAs. It's just basically, it's a check. It's to say, okay, here's what we would expect, and here's what we like. And they have, you know, their own SLAs internally that they look at. So I think that will always be there. But I think the collaboration will increase between partners. Obviously, as we go through some of these stages that we're going through now, there'll be the relationship will change, the expectations will change. Some SLAs will probably be relaxed, you know, to a degree, but I think they'll be there in general, because I think for both parties, it's a mechanism that kind of sets expectation.
Thank you, Roger. Any other comments on that one? No. Then I would like to ask, on this issue of rebuilding and boosting passenger confidence to fly, we can talk about what governments might do, but what do each of you on the panel think that we, within our own hands, should be doing to communicate to passengers and about all the measures we're taking to get them to feel confident that it isn't a risk going through an airport or getting on board a cabin? Peter, I'll pick on you first.
Yeah, I'll say, and we've, from my standpoint in IATA, we've advocated quite a lot over the last year as an industry representing our members and just air transport. And it's been a tough battle. It really has been, because during a pandemic, a crisis, people have different notions on air travel. And if you're not educated on it, it's very easily assumed that, aviation is the cause of the pandemic being spread around the world. And to some point, they're right. However, what we've tried to educate folks is what the industry has done, what it continues to do, and that people are not transmitting the disease on board airplanes. People are being flown already with the COVID virus, but that's not happening on board the airplane. One thing that we have to do, and we've learned, and we're learning, and we're talking about it internally, as an industry, we have to do a much better job communicating the value that air transport brings, both socially and economically, to our citizens around the world. And we can't do it. We've done, I think, a good job putting it in the Wall Street Journal, in the main financial media, but that's not the media we need to convince. The people who travel for business purposes or have a certain level of income, they know the value. It's the people who live in the small communities that may travel on an airplane once in a year, or use the bus system to go from one place to another for 18 hours, not knowing that getting on an airplane is just as economic as going on a bus. It's safer and it's quicker. And then those who never even get on an airplane, but that work in the fishery business or the flowers, that they earn their money thanks to air travel moving those goods. That is something that we have to do on a much better side. Maybe less in more developed countries, but when you look at Latin America and some other parts of the world, have to be much more effective in how we communicate. That this is not an industry of the rich. This is an industry that brings social and economic prosperity to our communities, and it's vital to the let's say the human lifeline. That's something we have to do much better, Max. We have not done that as well, and the pandemic has demonstrated that. You've seen campaigns all around the world: don't travel, don't travel, don't travel, because everyone's assuming that the pandemic is aviation is part of the cause.
Thanks, Peter. Interesting reflection. Jose, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, once I read that when you are in the darkest moment of the night, it means that actually the dawn is closer. So I believe that you have passed for so many things since last year. And the way that I see is that we have done a tremendous working together, all together, in order to explain to the people that this sector is not a vector, that we are safe. We have done so many webinars, so many, we brought so many servers and also videos explain everything. But Peter is right. We have to find a way to go, in that person that probably is going to travel just once or twice. This is something that you have to learn, and you have to understand that you have to pass this information in, and they have to feel that we are closer to them. But just in my last word in this summit, what I'd like to say is that we have right now, the message has to be not just for the people, but actually for the states, that we have to vaccinate people. This is the main message, that you have to do that. And why? Because we have some standards after vaccination. Like, if I got the vaccine, why should I have to do something in another country? We have to stabilize the system in order to bring the people back. And our function as association, I believe this is our job to do. This is a very important job that you have to still keep doing. It's the last walk the talk. We talk a lot, but we have to walk the talk. We have to say, and we have to do something for that.
Yeah. Thanks, Jose. Roger.
Yeah, and this is going, just looking at the IATA data, that Peter had shared, it says that 87% of the people surveyed say that they know that COVID is not going to go away anytime soon. It's going to stay with us. And 4 out of 5 say that the governments should start opening the borders. So at the end of the day, this is going to be one of those things to where, depending on where it is, it's not going to go away. The governments need to continue to push. The airport communities need to continue to say that it is safe to travel. The airlines need to continue, in their almost public service message type ways that they advertise, to say that the travel is again one of the safest ways, and again not an area that you're probably going to or have contacted the virus. So I think it's just going back to using every media that we have and every medium that we have to try to instill confidence in the flying public, whether you're in the air, whether you're at the airport, whether you're on the ground, or whatever the case may be, that it is safe, and that you need to get out and start traveling again to generate the commerce that the industry brings, because it's available, it is there. And to Jose's point, Swissport is a large player in the region, in the LATAM region, and he's exactly right when he says that if you just look at the chain of the Caribbean islands, air travel is the only way to get to the islands. So you have to get on an airplane. Yes, you can get on a boat. It'll take a little longer, but air travel is the interstate, if you will, to the for the U.S. So these are the things that we have to do, from government agencies all the way down to every aspect of the supply chain, to start instilling, to say, yes, it's safe to travel. Let's get out. Let's do it. The airlines are flying, but the governments need to send the positive message out by saying the borders are open, and still to say, hey, start traveling. It is safe, and the vaccine will continue to roll as it is today.
Thanks, Roger. Raphael, I'll come to you, and then I know you've got a hand up, Peter, so I will come back to you and load the results of the polls, and then we should wrap up. But Raphael, over to you on this issue of passenger confidence.
No, absolutely. I think that, as Peter was saying, we've actually communicated it to passengers. And the proof is that as soon as you remove restrictions, people fly. As simple as that. The problem is the uncertainty, not knowing what requirements are here or there, or the sudden imposition of requirements. For example, just give you an example. Panama government yesterday just passed on a law that says that if you are coming from Latin America, even if you have a negative PCR or if you are vaccinated, you will have to take a 5-day quarantine because of the Brazilian variant, which has been running around for a while. Why suddenly this restriction? Obviously, this is going to kill a lot of people flying. I was going to go for a business trip to Brazil. I'm not going anymore because of that restriction, And I think that, so passengers, people who want to fly in Europe, everybody wants to go for the summer holidays. It is clear, okay? It is this uncertainty and this lack of coordination. So our message, and we've actually been working with ALTA, with IATA, we show that we get together when it's necessary to pass on this message, but really our biggest challenge is the governments, okay? And ensuring that we understand the economic and social impact of aviation and the dependency of aviation for the whole socioeconomic structure of Latin America is absolutely key. It's not for the rich to fly, it's actually for everybody, and it's absolutely essential.
Thank you, Raphael. Peter.
Yeah, I'll just add on here on how important it is to communicate and more importantly, align with government, and government align with the industry. The COVID will not go away, and in the future we will have other pandemics. And you look at all the scientific evidence and medical, this will not be the last one. What we need to ensure here is that in the future, that the alignment between this industry and the government, it's much more aligned, coordinated, and transparent. Today, within even the government, there is multiple ministries trying to fight for power. You have health, transport, external affairs, the president's office. And that is something that we need to overcome moving forward. When the industry doesn't want to be a hurdle, and this is the messaging that we're trying to convince government as an industry as a whole. We want to be there to support in how we have to help our governments restart, stop, move forward. But what we need to make sure is that we have alignment, we have transparency, and we have coordination. Rafael gave an example of Panama. In Argentina, from one day to another, just a couple of days over the weekend, they modified all the flight schedules for most of the international carriers and just imposed restrictions. And we said we need an amount of time for airlines to adjust and adapt. You have a whole bunch of Argentinian citizens scattered all around the world that will not be able to come back. How are you going to get them back? So it's some of these decisions that are made without coordination, and the communication is so critical moving forward. And if we have one lesson to learn with governments, it's before taking measures, talk to your stakeholders, transparent, communicate, align, and then execute jointly. If we execute jointly, industry with government, we're going to be so much more effective, and the public is going to have a better understanding than what we have today, which in many cases is a lot of confusion and disorganization.
Thank you, Peter. If I can, I'm going to publish the results of our polls quickly because we're running very low on time. It's possible to load those up in the background. Here we go. Had our audience seen a sign of recovery so far? Well, resounding, almost 3/4 said yes, 73%. So they have seen improvement and green shoots coming through. So encouraging news there. And a second poll question about what we thought would be the most effective mechanism to help our sector recover from the pandemic. Vaccine rollout. Peter, you've got a following there. All concur, around about half concurring with you, and many of the other panelists here have echoed that the vaccine rollout holds the key. Be fascinating to hear tomorrow morning on our panel session how that process is going in the Americas and some of the challenges we have encountered. But coordinated travel protocols, look at that, just shy, 45% felt that was equally important and influential. So a combination of the two, perhaps central to driving, acting as a catalyst on our ability to recover. Gentlemen, it's been great fun talking to you. I've really enjoyed it. Very enlightening stuff and lots of passion on show. And yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max.
Well,
thank you, guys.
We're interested to follow the story and work together with each other and with governments. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Best of luck with the event.
Thank
Thanks, guys.
you. Roger,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Take care.